it was just a really visceral example to me of the reality that aliveness is actually tangible.
A good question can often provide more clarity than 1,000 answers, especially in the journey of the creative. But of all the questions, one stands out from all the rest. It is the question I follow in my art practice and the founding question of Art2Life.com, my online creative teaching platform. And it is this: what brings you alive? When human beings participate in what brings them alive, they become inspired. As a result, there's an uptick in creativity. I ask this question a lot, so much so that it recently prompted an email from someone who also loves this question. So of course, we instantly connected. Meet podcaster, writer, and fellow creative explorer, Brandi Stanley. It's been a long time since I've talked with someone who can so clearly articulate the nuances, challenges, and just the magic of those pursuing the creative path. I know I have found a great guest on this show because just by having a conversation with them, I learned something that I was not expecting to learn. And I think you will too. Click on podcasts at Art2Life.com to find links to Brandi's podcast, This Plus That, as well as her fabulous newsletter. Join Brandi and me now for this beautiful conversation about connections, purpose, and just the joy of the creative path. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. Brandi, listen, thanks so much for taking some time to share all you're doing and all you're exploring.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being in conversation with me. I always feel like it's such an honor to be invited into conversation with folks.
Yeah. And I was trying to think, like kind of looking at what you make and do and kind of like, how you try to put people in boxes and everything. But I mean, just like what your thing is and what, the closest I could get was just explorer, of life and the pursuit of the journey, and which is all what I'm up about, creativity and seeing what artists are doing and what creatives are doing, and they're finding their way and they don't know where they're going and all the things. And I just love that this is what you talk about, so it's perfect. But give me your, how do you describe yourself? How would you, I know you're going to say it in a way it's better than an explorer, but yeah.
It's funny because when I hear that, I spent a lot of my career in branding and marketing, and really branding in particular. And so that part of that was a real reliance on the idea of archetypes in the world. So brands usually have a particular archetype, and explorer is one of the archetypes. So I've never necessarily postured myself personally as an explorer, as like my primary archetype. But I do think that, curiosity and exploration and just a constant, maybe like seeking, a seeker, and I think always an incessant sort of internal question about why we're here. Why does that matter? And how do our values affect how we behave every day? And how we live those things out. But I think as I've gotten older and started doing this work that I've been doing recently in particular, I think I've come to a place where I feel like my sort of grounding truth or reality that I'm like working around is the idea of aliveness. Just that I think I've faced more than 10 years probably of chronic illness in my life. So there's been just like literally a personal sense of what it means to explore what does or does not bring me more alive, what helps me feel more vital in the world and have the energy that I think we all need to be able to give what we're here to give. So I think aliveness has become not just a sort of value system for me and a belief that I see in the world of like hopefully liberating more aliveness in other people so that they can do what they're here to do, but just my own personal exploration of what it means to be alive? What is aliveness? What is it to be vital? What is it to have or not have energy? What is the work that we do that brings us more or less life? Yeah, so I think that's been sort of my guiding question that I feel like without really even intending on it, I started working on. But it's interesting because when I think about that now, looking back when I started the podcast about a year ago, which is called This Plus That, it's originally, the description of the show is it's a show about connecting the seemingly unconnectable and why that matters. And originally the definition of creativity from Steve Jobs had a definition of creativity, which was just creativity is just connecting the seemingly unconnectable. But I've always found a deep aliveness. I think the stuff of life is really in the middle of things that seem to be contradictory or unrelated. And so I think similarly, even then, it all just sort of led me back to aliveness. I think beauty and life are really found in places that seem like they're in tension or seemingly contradictory to each other, but actually aren't.
Yeah, I think if you were to do a word cloud over, my courses and my coaching and helping artists, I think, the big word would be aliveness. The overarching principle of how I coach is to answer that question, to start paying attention to what brings you alive. So I love that question. And I was not aware that you had gone through, all those health challenges. I mean, you lived that, so you started to, can you take us back a little to some of how this, how you went through that? And, was it just like a reset from a place? Like I had a big upset where I lost a ton of my momentum quite a few years ago now, just emotionally, personally, financially, all the things. And then I started to put it back together, and it made me more aware of what the things were that I was adding in, because I wanted to make sure this time that whatever I added back in passed a certain grade. The bar was higher. And I'm just curious how that challenging time for you, was that similar, or was it just...
Yeah, I mean, it's, for me, it would be a bit hard to contain. Like, it wasn't necessarily a moment or like a year of my life that was very hard. I've struggled with chronic illness for at least 10 years. And that has been just an ever evolving pursuit of the root of that, or the roots, I guess, of what that would be. And so it's looked a lot of different ways over time. But I think, especially in these last 2 or 3 years, I mean, the story sort of goes for me that it was the beginning of 2020. I left the last full-time job that I'd ever worked for. And I'd worked for myself for a lot of my life, here and there, and sort of hopped in and out of work for other people, I guess you would say. So I left the last full-time job I had been in early 2020. And it was quite literally right before the pandemic. It was January 31st was my last day in 2020. And not much later, of course, in March, stuff started to shut down. And in February, right before that, after leaving the full-time job, I had decided to sort of put my full self into trying to run my own full-time branding and marketing, coaching business. So I was also running coaching, but it was more through the lens of business and branding and marketing. And I don't know, I spent several months trying to get that off the ground. But in early 2021, I hit a point where I like to say it was like a classic, you would have seen it in screenwriting and a movie. I had reached a point of such anxiety and stress that I was crying in my bathtub, just sobbing, realizing that my body or my spirit or something just no longer could do branding and marketing full time. I had known for so many years that it just wasn't what I wanted to do in the world, and didn't feel like if I had died tomorrow, that if I continued doing it, it was going to bring me, I would have fulfilled something that I was here to do, but I just didn't know what else that was. And so I wind up in my bathtub having a full-on panic attack, and basically just realizing whether or not I knew what I wanted to do, I knew that wasn't it. And that I had to sort of finally face a moment of saying, okay, Let's actually give yourself some time and space to explore what that might be. Since then, I mean, as I'm sure you're familiar with, I think once you start tackling anything in life, so as a coach, that like when you coach people through things, it's like, okay, well, you ask them to start believing that they're capable of making money, but that's related to their family history, which is related to their art practice, which is related to how they're avoidant, which is related to, so that really opened up a period of time for me that since has just been a deep exploration of my inner beliefs, my health, like that part of my inner beliefs, I think have led to some of my health challenges, and family history and trauma and all kinds of things, and how that has affected the way that I show up and what I believe that I'm capable of doing in the world, including being successful at whatever that means to me and doing my own art in the world. So yeah, it's been a really long process, but the chronic health stuff continues. And so I think that's why it's a deep part of my story that, I mean, I deal with fatigue issues and brain fog and pretty severe sleep issues also that apparently are related to my breathing and how small my airway passages are and all kinds of other things that like once you start unraveling a thread becomes this whole other thing. So yeah, it's a daily thing for me. And I realized, I guess the sort of end of that story, or like a way to sort of wrap that up in this scenario, is that I had this very visceral experience a few years ago where I had started getting really into science and quantum physics and all of these other things as someone who'd been sort of more artistically leaning for most of my life. And I had started to audit a class that was being offered here. I live in Colorado, and nearby they were offering a class that was sort of a mesh of like art and poetry and quantum physics being taught by someone who sort of all of those things. And I was still in my full-time job, and I would leave that full-time job and I would be utterly exhausted. The job was easy to me. It was not that difficult. I was a brand director. I had been doing it for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. It just came really naturally to me. So it wasn't like it technically should have been exhausting, but nonetheless, I left every day feeling very energetically drained. And I started going to this class I was auditing in the middle of the work week, just out of pure curiosity. It was a 4-hour long class on a Wednesday night across traffic. Like
oh my God.
It seemed like the worst possible idea, but I would sit in there from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And at 10 p.m. I would come out so energized that I would feel like running around the neighborhood. And for me, because I experience chronic fatigue, that's a feeling I don't experience very often. And so it was just a really visceral example to me of the reality that aliveness is actually tangible. I can actually see in my body when I am more or less alive, when work makes me more or less alive, or if it just completely drains me. And that was sort of a moment where I think I started to really practically realize that I have a podcast interview with someone named Andreas Weber, who was sort of one of my first entrees into the idea of aliveness. And I tell him the same story where it was just like, that was where I started to actually take the sort of metaphor or metaphysical idea of aliveness and actually apply it tangibly and realize that it was actually a clear guiding compass of where I should point myself in my life.
That's so beautiful. And this is also, it makes sense, but a person's art is just a metaphor for themselves. I mean, it's just, it's a placeholder right. for themselves. And I discovered this aliveness idea kind of for myself personally in my life, but then I saw and started applying it to the actual art making and principles and learning how to use this, how to search for areas. You can look in a messy painting or in any piece of art that you're making or have made, or somebody else's for that matter. And when you get good at this, you can notice parts that bring you more alive. You can just feel it and use that as a diagnostic tool about what to do next.
Yeah.
But it's this felt sense that, we're backing into creativity. We're backing into making things based on how we feel. Like I used to struggle so hard making a painting. and my dream was like that I could make something really good. And then I would make it, and sometimes I'd pull it off, and it would feel right. And then but it took a little while, but then I realized I don't need to, I can just connect to the feeling of what I want as I'm making the thing, and it turns into the thing. It's like so much easier. Yeah. But it's a complete mystery. I mean, I don't even know if people would understand what I'm talking about here. I mean, it's so hard to get my finger on this, but what you're talking about as a compass, as a diagnostic tool, I just love that.
What you're speaking to, though, is I think why I sometimes refer to this as like the erotic. Like, I think when we hear folks like Esther Perel or Audre Lorde or Andreas Weber, who I mentioned a second ago, speak about aliveness, there's a sense about it that is wild. It's untamable. It's tapping into something that is not logic or right-brained. Or left-brained, sorry. Yeah, where curiosity and creativity really lives. It's where the vitality of life really sits.
Yes.
And I think that's the extremely scary part of it in terms of being an artist, is that I think there's a degree to which you have to actually be willing individually to tap into what you want and to actually be in tune with what you want.
Yes.
I think is pretty scary, because we live in a world where it's easier to be distracted from how we actually feel. It's easier to be told what to do. It's easier to go do work that just seems easy to you than it is to like actually spend time and some real self-awareness to look internally, to admit, I don't actually want to do this job, or I do want to do this thing. How scary is that?
Yeah. I have nothing to replace it. I don't know. You can't know where you're going, which is exactly like art making, by the way. I know I kind of like this, but if I'm truly connecting to what it is that I love or that brings me alive, because we're all so different, there isn't a path laid out.
Right.
And I think you're speaking to that. That's the scary part of this, but it is literally a frontier, the wild unknown. It's where the juice is. It's the fire,
Yeah, and believing that you rightfully have your own path. And yeah, I mean, I think I've also spent a lot of my life being, Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way talks about, shadow artists. And the idea being that like often artists, and I think honestly a lot of humans in general, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, tend to surround yourself by people who inspire you around what it is that you would rather be doing.
Yes.
As a way to sort of keep from you, like you don't have to do it if you're around people who do it all the time. You get a sense of that inspiration without actually having to do the scary work of trying it yourself.
Yes.
And I think I've spent a lot of my life around people who were like gravitationally just super powerful and incredible writers and incredible artists. Yeah, it's just a lot easier to do that than it is to be like, oh, I actually have a path of my own. And that means that I actually have no idea what that looks like. But it's more important to me to be willing to step into that unknown and live a life of deep meaning than it would be to, just ignore that.
Yeah.
And stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea that so you and I share a love. I sort of read this, that you just love questions, and I'm the same way. But this idea of what, people trying to find their way in their creativity and their art, a really great question is, what have you surrounded yourself with? Because the answers are all around you. And it's so funny. It's like but there's a limiting belief about how close to it we can get, Yeah. And so I see that with so many people that they know the sort of tagline of one of Art2Life, at least in our high intensity kind of bootjack art camp, is, become the artist you're meant to be. The thing is, people, they kind of know they're artists. They're not ready yet to move into it, but they absolutely know. The tug is there. And I think when somebody starts speaking to that, if it's me or a coach or whatever, it's like it just takes over, just needs a little bit of life blown into it. I mean, what you were saying about that idea that, a teacher, a really great teacher or a guru or whatever, is someone who unlocks the guru within somebody else. I mean,
Right.
that's what I love doing. And that's what I found in me. But that's so cool that you highlighted that.
Yeah, it's fun. I've written about that before too. The idea, there's a podcast I know of, the title of the actual episode is called The Last Guru. It's like any great guru basically teaches you to be your own sort of guide. Yeah, trusting yourself. And I think that also, I joke sometimes that I think that a lot of the reason that coaches exist is because people will pay you a lot of money to continue telling them that something else is possible. Really, like, it's like an inescapable whisper in the like soul or back of your mind or whatever of every artist. And again, I think basically every human has that, like, what is it that you're here to give? And whether or not it's painting that you like, we actually call art, or whether it's being a nurse, I think that like there's something, I think, in the back of a lot of people that is an incessant whisper that, like, you know it to be true. And until you actually feel ready, you will often do everything you can to surround yourself with people who are showing you that it is.
Yes, this idea that, I have two daughters, in their 20s, and they're in the workforce world, and they're figuring things out. And this question that I ask, like, well, why were you born? What are you here to do? And it's and I think for them, I was having this conversation with her, and she doesn't know. And I think it's hard to know. And it's not necessarily a definitive answer, but I think there's a way to hold that question that allows the answer to move towards that answer. We're talking about journey here and finding our way. Yeah. And I just don't think, like, you get to know, it's like, oh, I know, my purpose is this. But it comes rather from half starts and try this and go that way. But it's almost like pondering the question starts to bring it. I mean, how do you coach? How do you think of this journey to purpose, to deeper truth? I mean, how do you what I mean? How do you talk to a really young person who is just, you struggled with this idea of like, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? And there's not one thing, and it's
like there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I think some things that I feel like I've come across in the last few years have been the idea that, like, I think I thought purpose was some external thing that I was constantly chasing, and that I was having, I was on this grand, call it Joseph Campbell or some sort of like search for that was external. It was somewhere else I had to find. And eventually when I found it, I would, live some sort of deep, meaningful life. And I think what I've actually found is that purpose is so intrinsic to who we each are as individuals. I think that you're never not living your purpose from the second you're born, or maybe even before that.
Yeah.
I think about it a little like a walnut tree or a cherry tree or something. And it's like, you are constantly dropping walnuts everywhere you go from the time, you begin making fruit. And before that, you're gestating into that point. But like you are always at every time, like, we are no different than nature. So that means that I can look at nature to tell me that me being the most me, first of all, is the most purpose I can live. And my only real work is uncovering more and more the deepest part of who I am. And often aliveness tells me that. Aliveness is what tells me, oh, that is actually what I'm here for. That's what lights me up. That is who I am so deeply that me doing that would actually be serving my purpose at all times. And I think this is different for personality types. If you believe in sort of archetypes, or, like whether it's Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or any type of personality testing, that there are certain people who, I talk in one of my podcast episodes with David Epstein, who wrote Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, because it felt very validating for me to find someone who had done a ton of research about the idea that, like, some people are made to do a lot of different things in their life. But like, I do think that there are some people who are meant to specialize. I do think that there are some people who do find their purpose relatively early on, and they just know, and they start from a relatively early age. They know they want to be a doctor. Tiger Woods knew he wanted to be a golfer pretty early. So I think there are some people like that, but there are other people who take a bit of time to gestate, and that's okay too. And all of them serve different parts within the collective of society to make us all healthy. And I think, it's funny, you were talking and I was remembering that quote. I think it's Thoreau that said something, how arrogant it is to sit down to write when you've not stood up to live. Yeah, sometimes you just got to do some living before you're ready to actually, like, you have a thing to say to offer the world.
You talking about this purpose idea a few minutes ago, I just put something together that I've never really, I was sharing with you how you can back into making a painting or making a piece of art by identifying the feeling of what the thing wants to feel like or what makes you come alive. But you can also back into your purpose in this way. I mean, just using this tool is putting you on purpose, which is beautiful and so simple, and so doable. It's so actionable. You can just begin today. I mean, choose which way you walk home from work. I mean, it's amazing how those micro adjustments kind of bonk you into things that almost take you further towards where you need to go. I mean, I'm kind of going into synchronicity a little here, which I wanted to talk to you about, because it's something that when we're on purpose or when we're feeling alive or when we're moving towards that, and this is something that I discovered that, the universe, the field, whatever, there's a larger call and response, that we're not just in a call and response to our deeper truths, but there's a sort of bigger truth that we're connecting into. And when that happens, external things start coming across our path. And it was just law of attraction or whatever. But this is one of the primary things that we use at Art2Life. We've created a container for this to occur with our members doing this program. And I mean, it's a life, art and life blend mix, chasing both, optimizes both. Could you speak a little bit about this sort of magical, cool, wondrous, I just love this, and it's what got me into coaching. It's why I love painting best of all, but second best is just talking to people that are having the magical experiences,
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, if other people are like me, this might resonate, but I think a lot of us are sort of taught that, like, there's some sense of a messaging I think a lot of us get, and I don't know if it's just Western culture or what that might be, but like this message that's around that we sort of have to struggle in order to survive. So I have to just plod along. I have to keep doing this thing that I don't really want to do so I can make enough money. But then by the time I'm at the end of my life, I've not really enjoyed any of it. But like that is really sort of the highest we can hope for, I guess, is just to like sort of suffer until death. And I think that one of the reasons this has been so profound for me is just to realize that what if like me in my natural state, me just existing in the world actually was purpose and was like, what if what brought me joy, I guess, was me fulfilling everything that I'm here to fulfill? And I think that's a sort of different way to talk about like backing into the idea of aliveness, right? That to some degree joy, like I think I say aliveness to me felt more tangible than joy. I think it's, it was a felt experience in my body. Joy, I think, is a little like happiness to me, and in the sense that like it can feel just like, oh, I'm just happy all the time. Like it's not quite like that. I think aliveness to me felt like it grounded itself in my actual body, and I could feel when I had more or less energy. It was a very tangible experience. So that became an easier way to talk about it. But I think really at its core, it's like, what is it that, lights me up, that brings me joy? And I think that, again, I think the real inspiration for that is looking to nature and going like, we are part of nature. If you look in ecology, like a wolf or a butterfly, they are just being themselves. Like we don't know of, I guess, but I don't surmise that there's any, like a butterfly flying around being like, I'm not sure if I'm fulfilling my purpose. But by nature of flying around and transferring one thing to another, or like a bee, for instance, transferring pollen from one place to another, that it serves not just like its own aliveness, that it is getting its own resources and what it needs in the world, but by nature of doing what it's doing, it is naturally serving a massive ecological purpose that has implications far beyond just moving one piece of pollen to another, from one flower to another, right? And so I think that similarly, I started to go, okay, well, if that's nature and if humans are part of nature, and I think that's been part of why we're here and having this struggle, is that we have stopped viewing humans as part of nature and instead view humans as maybe in control of nature or at the whim of nature, whatever that might be. I think we see ourselves as separate from nature. But if we really start to understand that humans are part of nature just as much as a tree or an elephant or a tiger or a butterfly, then me doing whatever I love to do in my natural state without overly forcing something, without making myself have to get up every day and do something because I think that's what I'm supposed to do. If I actually tap into what makes me come alive, then by nature, I might not even understand that what I'm doing, like a bee, has huge collective implication that maybe I will never be aware of. But nonetheless doesn't mean that I haven't served a deep purpose in community for my life. Yes. And so to get at your question, I guess, is like, I think the role then becomes not just attuning to that feeling of like what makes me come more or less alive, but realizing that I don't have to force myself to do anything in order to serve purpose. And I also, in letting go and just realizing that like me being in flow is like a bee moving pollen from one flower to another. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, if I am in flow, then resources that I need will come to me without having to be scared or feeling like I'm in constant lack and I have to find what I need in order to survive. And also I will offer resources to community that other people need without having to force it. And so I think that we feel often like we have to overly give, we have to constantly be producing, we have to be always doing in order to find purpose also. But I think nature works in cycles. Nature works in flow. Like those resources live in a gift economy where one resource gets transferred to someone else and another resource gets transferred. Like trees get, nutrients when they need it. Mycelium transfer nutrients and like things that trees need whenever they're needed. So nature works in a gift economy, basically. And if humans can fall more in line with that, and which basically just means being the highest self that you are, being the thing that makes you come most alive, then I think that's where we start to actually experience things like synchronicity, where you go, I didn't even try for this and something showed up to me. That's wild. So,
right.
So I think we're learning, I think, that all of these ideas that, I think have been written off as like metaphysical or too woo or whatever in terms of like law of attraction or synchronicity is actually biologically and ecologically just a truth of how the universe works. And I think we're starting to see that science is actually proving what we see to be true in reality.
Yes, beautifully said. I couldn't agree more that you are, in fact, giving off. You are in an active extension of positive, energy going out when you are in flow, when you are doing your thing. And I think that creates the receptivity, that creates the attraction for these other things to come in. It's definitely not of lack. I mean, it's just being in presence with what you're doing and what you're making. The idea of doing things that bring you alive, and I'm just curious because this is how I teach this or how I think about creativity, that creativity is actually a part of a chain reaction, and it's connected to feeling alive, because when you do things or when you participate in what brings you alive, it does create, I don't know if joy is just joy. And I know that I have a problem with the word too, like, walking around, I'm joyful, but it creates the joy, which translates into a state of inspiration where you have more, you're in a state of abundance. And then you can you don't know what to do with this positivity. And it's like, I think this is when creativity comes in. It comes out of a state of inspiration. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just like a chain reaction. Like you can't make something, you can't create something, you can't be in a state of wonder if you're at a soul-sucking job, it doesn't work that way. It comes when you're like running on the beach or whatever the things are that you're just present in a state that is, you're not distracted, you're just flowing, and then this starts to happen. And I think that's a really great clue for artists, folks listening to this, like how to get this thing going better, how to get your state of creativity, how to optimize yourself to generate more and more and just get the momentum and direct the path.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of one of the problems I think that we have now too, is this mentality that like creativity comes out of forcing, like if I can just create social media every day, and if I like if I sit down and write all the emails, if I write a blog post every day, if I, there's this like tendency to think that we have to constantly be producing. And I think part of why I like to remind myself, like sort of with the phrase that my only real job is to be in gratitude, because it's an easy way for me to remind myself that what actually makes me feel most connected to the universe or synchronicity or whatever is actually getting into a state of gratitude. The easiest way for me to access gratitude is when I'm actually just in my state of aliveness, doing things that bring me most alive. And so I don't find that very often when I sit down and feel like I just have to write something because I'm supposed to write something, because I'm like, to be a good content producer or something, I have to put something out every week, like once a week or twice a week or every day or whatever that is. And I find that the magic of synchronicity or this like intangible quality of the universe is that, I was just telling someone, I just interviewed someone for my podcast right before this conversation. And I was telling her, because she was like, I have to get onto YouTube and I have to I don't really like writing stuff on social media. And I was like, honestly, from a 20-year marketing professional, I'm going to tell you don't, because I have found that you could spend all year, once a week, every week, doing the things that you think you need to do in order to like make yourself successful or get big or like whatever that is as a creator. But the magic thing is that when you're in alignment, when you feel alive, when you feel connected to your work, when you feel connected to someone else's work, that it's like when I reached out to you, like I see an alignment there. So there's a spirit that's shared between us in some way. So when I write you feel that. I could have said 3 words and you probably would have felt that, right? And so then you feel that, then we talk. And then when we talk, we share that sort of electricity, aliveness when we're talking about these sort of things, because we get excited about having these sorts of conversations. And then whoever's listening to this then gets inspired and in a way, right? And they feel more alive. And so I feel like the real truth about how the universe works is that you could spend every week doing tasks on your list that you think will make you successful as a creator. Or you could live in ease and get into a state of aliveness where maybe like you don't even care when it happens, but at some point you're in such a state of connection with yourself and whatever it is that brings you alive that you do one thing and somehow it just like transcends everything that you could have exhausted yourself doing a million tasks around, and has more impact on the people listening to it, the people who see it, the people who read it, like whatever that is something you can't control, right? And again, that's that sort of like aliveness as that thing that can't be tamed. We try and tame creativity everywhere we go, but I think it's so much more joyful for us to be engaging with the things that make us come alive and being in rest and believing that when something is supposed to be created, it will. Because when you're actually tapped into that, you find that it's actually impossible not to create. Like when you actually are feeling that, it's not like, well, I'm supposed to go paint today. Instead, you're like, I can't stop myself from painting today. I feel so compelled by this, right? And so I think something is magic about forgetting all the things that we've been told about how we're supposed to create and how often we're supposed to create or what that's supposed to look like. And instead believing, and again, it's like a sense of trust and like whatever you want to call it, the universe, magic, the mystery or whatever, that those things will come if I'm doing my job, which is to be just tapped into who I am and what lights me up. When I finally feel compelled to create, that, man, when I do it, the impact that has will be so different and it will be felt so differently by whoever experiences it than it would be if I just write an email on a Tuesday, because that's when I'm supposed to write an email.
Absolutely. It's so much more potent and so much easier. You know, it's kind of it's hard to believe. I mean, I get excited thinking about it, that I can actually me finding my way as I go can take me just perfectly where I need to go, and that it's all going to work out. And I mean, kill it. Like I see this when artists get some of these things starting to work for them. I mean, it's exponential what happens. I mean, it's powerful stuff. It's like the power of the ocean, it's like when it's rough, man, it's not just like it's got a lot of momentum and strength.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the interdependency with nature again, right? It's like, or with the universe. Like, I think we think that it's like all us. Like I've got to do all the things. I have to write all the emails. I have to do, it's all on me. I've got to just constantly be working. I have to constantly be doing. But a step back helps us realize, I think, if we're looking at nature, that I'm in constant co-creation with everything around me. And I'm in interdependence with nature and all of my relationships, from my partnerships romantically to my friendships, to my food, to the home I live in. Like, this is a constant interdependence of relationship. And if that's true, then it's not all on me.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And I can trust that the universe will provide what I need when I need it. And I can give when I feel resourced to give it. Yes.
That's so true. And it's just so reassuring and powerful. That's beautiful.
And less exhausting, like you said. It's just so much more a state of ease than it is just to like constantly exhaust ourselves by thinking we have to like be doing and doing and doing all the time. Yes,
it's that idea of like, pushing off from the side of the riverbank and just floating, just let the current take you and do all the things, but you're going down the stream,
Yeah, we play a part. It's not to say that like we just sit in the stream and we don't paddle, like we are part of the dance. It can't just be the universe. I'm going to sit on my couch and do nothing and trust that everything's going to come to me. You also have to contribute. You have to participate, but it's also realizing that it's not all on you to make sure that the canoe goes in the right place. The river's going to take you to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of, steer a little bit less and pay attention to just floating more,
Right.
Yeah. Brandi, and we're just going to wrap this up here, but just curious, I know that you're like a lover of questions, and is there a kind of compelling question that you've used or offer to folks to help them, just get clarity on how to jumpstart some of this going deeper? I'm just curious.
That is a great question in and of itself.
Yeah, that might be it.
Yeah, I mean, not to sort of beat a dead horse, but I do think that my constant question for myself and everybody else is just, what makes you come most alive? And it doesn't have to be esoteric. I mean, I think genuinely today, are you depleted, or do you feel resourced? And if you feel depleted, maybe it's time to just take a nap. Yeah. And if you feel compelled to do something, then do that. But let that be, I think, more of your guide than anything else. I think we overemphasize our minds and de-emphasize our bodies. And I think again, sort of going back to my experience in chronic illness, that I have fought tooth and nail to ignore my body. But the body, if you ignore it enough, will actually symptomatically tell you that something's off over and over again. Until you actually pay attention to that and stop ignoring it, like it will get louder and louder and louder until you are incapable of ignoring it. And so I think paying attention, like growing an awareness of this, the signals that our body is actually telling us on a daily basis about what is or is not good for us, what does or does not bring us most alive. How we're actually physically feeling in our bodies today, and how that can be a compass of where we're supposed to point ourselves next.
Brandi, listen, thank you so much. It's just really exciting. and you were so articulate about this material, but this is what I love, and I know the listeners really got a lot out of this. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you again. It's an honor to be in conversation.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at Art2Life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to art2lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to art2lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.